Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. You're on Iron Radio. This is Phil Stevens. I'm a coach, powerlifter, Highland Games athlete, and here to impart some memories on you again.
Nice. This is Dr. Mike Nelson. I'm creator of the Flex Diet and the PhysFlex Cert and associate professor at the Kerrigan Institute.
And I am Lonnie Lowry. I'm an industry consultant with the food industry, exercise physiologist, adjunct professor, that kind of thing.
Former competitive bodybuilder, too.
Oh, yeah. Let's not forget. I did do that for a long time. Did do that. You know, it's easy to forget these days. I'm just such a ball of scar tissue and everything else. That, yeah. You might think, well, that came from somewhere. Yeah, it did, but it keeps me from doing a lot of those things. I guess I could diet real hard. Do you remember the old Clarence Bass, you guys, like in the back of muscle magazines, like Get Ripped or the Ripped books? He was a guy who just dieted real hard, I feel like, as he got older. And he was ripped, I guess. He was lean. Yep. Wasn't very big. I don't know if I want to do that, though.
Come back, Lonnie.
Yeah, no. If I squat more than 2 1/4 now, my arms go numb for 3 days. I don't want to be one of these guys where, despite the injury, I'm going to make my ultimate comeback. Bad idea. It's usually a bad idea. Yeah. All right. I have one piece of science I want to get your guys' opinion on. Before I do that, quick announcement to anybody. If you are on the Iron Radio mailing list, and we don't have a huge mailing list, but there's hundreds of people on there, and you're not getting an email once a week, sometimes it'll even go out twice a week like a reminder. It's just the show notes and what we talked about this week. If you're not getting that, check your junk mail, because I notice I'm getting mine in my junk mail. I'm like, where's the email from Iron Radio? So check your junk mail and drag it over to your inbox. Usually that's all you have to do, so you don't miss out.
There you go.
Okay. So from Science News, this is more of a psychology piece of news, and I'll just read through a little bit of this and see what you guys think. So, time in nature or exercise is touted for happiness, but evidence is lacking. A review of hundreds of studies finds limited, rigorous research behind many happiness hacks. Oh, and by the way, this is by Luis, it looks like Malecchio Zambrano. This is just late July, so this is brand spanking new. Go on a run, hike through nature, and meditate, and you're basically guaranteed a happier life. At least that's what many, essentially influencers might lead you to believe. But new research is bringing new attention to this. Like, what is the quality of the evidence? And this is partly because of this replication crisis. And I don't know if you guys have heard about this. Mike may have. It's more of an issue in psychology as I understand it, but there was a lot of key psychological studies throughout history that haven't been replicated. Like, people can't repeat it. And so they're like, well, that was like a landmark study, but that's not what I found. And so that causes some problems, and some of these researchers are doubling down on, so what's quality evidence? So these two researchers, Folk and Dunn from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, they combed through hundreds of papers on happiness. They were plentiful, but not by the rigorous standards, what they're calling modern rigor. So large sample size and pre-registration. And the idea of pre-registering a study, I think like clinicaltrials.gov, but they're doing it more like, I think it's more of an issue with psychology. It's like, here is all the structure of the study. Here's my hypothesis. Here's everything. Then I go do the data. Because then you're kind of calling your shot in advance. Here's the hypothesis I'm going to test, my prediction that I'm going to test. And then you can't do stuff like follow your data and end up inflating the alpha, right? Saying you found something that you didn't actually set out to find. It's kind of violating one of the assumptions of p-values and reliable research and everything else is when you chase data, you're like, well, we didn't find that hypothesis. We couldn't support that one, but it happened just in men or just in women or just in, for my background, habituated coffee drinkers or whatever it might be. So they don't want people kind of breaking the rules, if you will, with small sample sizes and not pre-registering studies. Now, pre-registration has been controversial itself, as I understand it. There's been some people saying, I'm concerned about this. Like, one concern would be that it doesn't let you explore your data set and, stumble across something. I think about that old Isaac Asimov quote, like, the best thing to hear in science is not eureka. It's, that's funny, right? And you want to report, that's funny. But the people who are pro pre-registration of studies, and you could just upload basically your study design to these different websites and say, this is, I'm calling my shot here in advance. They suggest it doesn't stifle that kind of discovery. Anyway, it says this research started with a question from a journalist who asked, the things we hear about in the media as being really important for happiness, like meditation and nature, how rigorous is the research behind these claims? So they found over 500 studies. Fewer than 60 of them met what they call their contemporary standards. It says, take exercise. Dunn and Folk found no study that both had sufficiently large sample size and was pre-registered. They did find a dozen studies that included enough people to have meaningful conclusions. 5 of those studies found evidence that people feel happier after a single bout of exercise, but only in comparison with rather boring activities like sitting in silence or watching a documentary on bookbinding. It says, similarly, the researchers found only 4 experiments that supported the happiness benefit of spending time in nature and had large enough sample sizes, though none of those were pre-registered. And I'm not going to go into this, is 8 pages of stuff on this, but it's interesting that they're even calling in question exercise, right? Because to me, everything is biopsychosocial. And yeah, if there's a psychological paper out there, that's one thing. But I think there's physical reasons to believe that exercises can induce happiness hormones, if you will, right? Whether it's the like endocannabinoid system or dopamine or whatever it is, you'd think there's some physical things going on there as well. I don't know.
Mike would probably be able to speak more on the science side of this things, but from what I've seen, I mean, it just does. The problem I'm seeing, though, is that a lot of times the people that are happiest with exercise are those who have been doing it long enough to be a lifer, if that makes sense. It's like once you have that habit, then you know how good you feel doing it. Like when you first start, like exercise just sucks. You don't feel that much better afterwards. But like somebody like us that have been doing it for decades, like if I take a week off, like there's times I do that on purpose, but I'm itching to get back in there, and I will physically feel worse from time off. Like if I take an extended period of time off, like I get sore as shit. So it's not just the physical side of it, but I want that release from a mental aspect. But like I literally feel physically worse too, which kind of ties into that as you get going. And I think once you've done something for years, like, okay, I've done this 3 days a week for years, it's just part of your life. And when you miss that, there is a mental aspect to it.
You notice it,
You notice it's gone. And like, I think it's hard to notice. What I'm getting is I think it's hard to notice. It's not like you're high after you work out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that big of a thing. But I think after time, you do notice that you're getting something out of it. And it's, whether it's endorphin rushes and things like that, I don't know. But I don't know. From the rubber hits the road aspect, like it doesn't matter. I just know I feel better when I do it. So I keep doing it.
Yeah. You always bring up population specificity, and here it is again. Like, who are you studying? Because if it's people who've done it forever,
Yeah, you take a new person that never exercised and you make them go train, they're not going to report that it was an enjoyable experience. They're going to report how they felt tomorrow, which is sore as shit. And they're going to have a negative aspect to that. But
I have a question about this study. How do they define the markers for happiness, like the parameters?
Yeah, I didn't dig that deep. I'd point people to Science News to go look and see how they did that. Remember, these are many studies. They were looking at many, many studies, and I don't know what the psychological tools are. They have these validated instruments for happiness. Like I'm familiar with stuff like that profile of mood states, right? The PALMS, it's like 65 questions. Who knows? They probably use all these different markers. But when they do these kind of large umbrella reviews or meta-analyses, they'll try to standardize, because people are using different tests and that kind of stuff. So
I would say I just remember some of the psych classes, them talking about like happiness being such a tough, almost like nebulous thing that's like stamped down, in the science of psychology that's like, so you have, I guess what you would call, I don't think I remember our professor calling it like euphoria, where it's like, that's like a conjoined, like all things together, in a feeling, so to speak, versus like you are truly content in your life kind of thing. And I mean, I don't know that you would get euphoric feelings from, happiness or whatever. The same thing with like accomplishment. Like this, I think the same research issues come into play with something as simple as like just accomplishment and like what that does. Like, are you trying to get away from pain? Or are you going towards that euphoria feeling? And so like narrowing down that and I've heard that, or at least our professors always talked about like psych and exercise science, like just in general are really tough areas to nail down a lot of stuff, because there's a lot of stuff we kind of just say openly, like happy, like, oh, this person is happy or that person is, not happy, that isn't really able to be represented in, a data, a subset of some kind.
Yeah. Human emotions are very complex. I totally get it.
Well,
this is
individual.
Yeah. This is July 20th of Nature Human Behavior. So this is a really top tier journal. I'd have to go back and look and see some of the different studies that they actually pulled. Because what I'd have to do is go beyond this reporting to the paper, and then the papers that make up this paper. And I don't, the instruments that they use, I don't know. But I guess if we assume that they're validly assessing happiness, but you're right. I mean, how many different dimensions of happiness are there, or positive mood states and that kind of thing? It does speak to what you're saying about it's hard to nail down, because that's why they have that whole replication crisis in psychology, right? Because it is a subjective thing. It is harder to nail down. And they're like, oh my God, a lot of these landmark papers, we don't see that when we look at it again, and the risk would be that if you keep changing your hypothesis to follow the data, you're kind of reverse engineering, a result. You're not lying, you're following the data, but before you know it, you lose track of your original hypothesis kind of thing. I think it does get at the idea of a lot of the influencers and the truth of the internet is that information spreads so quickly. Everybody they just wanted the right marketing terms to get clicked, their Instagram post or their YouTube, whatever. So they're going to use whatever marketing terms or whatever and try to spread, or even stuff like, you've heard me bitch about it before. Here's my curmudgeon mode, but it's like, I have no background in this. I have no education. I just want to share my experience. Okay, but people take some of that to heart. So you have to be really careful doing that, because you could be doing some real damage spreading this stuff. Now, having said this, I don't think anybody's going to say exercise or being in nature or meditation isn't good. I don't know how you measure good. Yeah. Mike, what do you think about this? What's your take on this? I know you meditate and you like the nature thing. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of what we talked about in the last episode too, is that a lot of times people are looking for the silver bullet. So it's like, oh, if I exercise for 20 minutes a day, then I'll be happy. Like, well, it's better. Like, better than not 20 minutes of exercise a day. But does that mean that's going to solve all your ills? No. I mean, we all know people who still exercise a fair amount who are not very happy people. But I would say that they're in the minority compared to people who don't exercise, just as a anecdotal population observation. But yeah, it's super hard to replicate, and like you said, Lonnie, control for other factors that may affect it. 'Cause like, in these studies, they're going to try to, control for everything else as best that they can and best as they can adjust via the power of the study, etc. And like what Jarrell was saying too, is that there's even in research other types of happiness. So like one of the quote unquote better ones is something called eudaimonic happiness. So there's even different grades per se of the level of happy and different words for different degrees of it also.
Yeah. Well, in one part it says, well, what's the harm of this information being spread around? These are generally good things. Meditate, exercise, get outside, or even exercise outside. What's the harm? One comment was, well, the harm could be that because this is being presented as evidence-based science when you do go meditate and you don't get happy, like kind of like we're all saying, or you exercise and you're still miserable, you might think, well, what's wrong with me? The science says I should be happy. What's wrong with me? And I think recognizing that human beings are incredibly complex individuals is part of that, right?
Well, I think
just hearing that, like, as you know, as stated, and I'm this is just based on, you know, my personal experience with people coming into the gym and like how much people stick with something like meditation. And I'll tell you, I suggest it to a lot of people just in terms of like controlling their emotional, like not letting their emotions drive them, essentially, especially when it comes to like food and things like that. So, and you know how many people have like actually stuck with, because meditation and training and most of the things that you would do to consider this like effective is a practice, not like you do it and then the result happens on the other side, like immediately on the other side of it. It's like, I mean, you have to have done it for a while before the meditation benefits actually even, I would say, like kick in. Like you have to practice it. Like it's not like you're gonna meditate one time and then you probably don't even understand it. I even would consider this almost like jujitsu. It's like when you get on the mats, you don't even really understand what's happening. Like you kind of get it, but you don't understand it until you've practiced it a while. Then you can start seeing the whole mountain, you know. It's like right now you just see, you know, the path. Like that is it. Like you don't see anything else. And the idea that people like actually stick to stuff and see it through to the point where they would actually get those benefits is, I would just say, rare in general with just people coming in off the street.
It's a good point. In my experience, the Asian approach to psychology is a little bit more like, it's not just back and forth with a counselor. It's more like training, internal training. Like if you don't practice meditation, like clearing your mind, you're not good at it, right? You have to kind of build those pathways, just like you'd have to build your biceps. I mean, neuroplasticity is a thing. You got to train in a certain direction, I would think, to really kind of reap rewards. They did say this. I'll end with this. So what did come out, even with their criteria for rigor, right? Large sample sizes and pre-registration, gratitude, and again, I'm going to paint with a broad brush. Gratitude and helping others were two things that were really seemed to be happiness inducing. And again, yeah, there's operational definitions of happiness and all this kind of stuff. I can see that as well. All the stuff here on this list is important. And I do like the idea that they're like, how much real science, repeatable, reproducible science is behind some of this, you know, because that should matter. And if you can't reproduce some of these psychology studies, no wonder for the past decade or so, there's been this like kind of crisis going on in some of the behavioral sciences. Like, oh my God, we can't reproduce, you know, science is something that's one of the standards. You know, if you can't reproduce it, then it's not reliable info you can count on, you know, in a sense.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think also, and this kind of feeds into what we'll talk to after the break, but I think especially with exercise and probably everything, like you guys said, like you don't get good at meditating until you practice it, but I'd be interested in like what exercise they had them do and how prepared were the subjects for said activity. For example, my son started football practice this week. We went to his first practice, which was 2 hours of them just getting their asses kicked. There were 3 kids crying and 2 kids puking. I guarantee when they left that practice, they weren't saying they're happy.
Right, not happy.
But my son, who was at the same exact practice and did the same thing, was like, that was the most awesome thing ever. I loved it. You know, he was actually prepared for the activity they were going to do. And like, while it was hard and it kicked his butt, he was able to complete it, you know, and it was just hard and he loved it, you know, but he's used to exercising. He exercised 3-4 days a week already. So he came in, prepared for said exercise. He didn't just come in like a new person going to CrossFit, you know, and they just kick your ass. A lot of them are like, fuck, I'm never coming back. But then you get a percentage of population that's weird. And that's what CrossFit built off of, was like, we're going to kick your ass and you're going to get this endorphin rush. And it's like this community of, we lived through the activity, and they start to love that. So it's
a weeding process. Yeah. Let's get rid of anybody who's not going to be a zealot, because we want zealots.
Exactly. But I mean, and like I said, this will feed into the topic after. But if we take the time to just get people with limited activity to find out that activity is fun and they learn it and then push them, like that's my big talk with people with kids in fitness. Like, number one thing you need to do, let's make them see this as enjoyable. Once they get that, once you have that foundation built, like, look, physical activity is something you can have fun doing. Now I can push them harder because they love it. Whereas if I just take somebody off the street and just, okay, we're going to kick your ass, there's a large percentage of them that aren't going to come back when
that's not a reward.
Right. Yeah, they can't walk right for 5 days. They're like, I'm not going back to Phil.
It's a good point. We're messed up, right? Because when
yes.
the last time I squatted after not doing it for a while because of my cervical spine and stuff, my legs were wrecked. I was waddling. I loved it.
But you loved
How messed up is that?
Yes, and that's what I was talking about with my son. He's 8, and he's like, Papa, the day after practice, I think I got something wrong with me. My stomach hurts really bad. And they did like 200 sit-ups.
Oh, yeah.
He thought he was physically ill. I was like, no, buddy, you're just sore. And the weird thing is, give it a few years, you're going to love that. You stop getting sore. We stop getting sore every workout, and we miss it. And then you do a workout where you get yourself sore, and you're like, oh, yeah.
Right.
We're not mentally right.
The idea that pain leads to happiness.
Yes.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you did you accomplished something. It's like our sign that we know like you talk about all the time with the tissue assassin and stuff like that. Like bodybuilders want to be sore when they leave the next day after training. Because that means progress. And but that takes time to build into somebody for them to, like, if you just make them sore and they have no background in it, they're like, oh shit, this is bad. They see it as
now that you're saying this, I want to go back and look through some of these dozens or even hundreds of studies. What would they use as exercise if they're taking Gen Pop people? The usual default is some kind of walking, right? Because it's a locomotor activity that they just assume most people can do. I see a lot of healthcare practitioners, dietitians, nurses, people like that. They're, exercise program means walking out of the gate, or they'll say physical activity. They don't even want to say exercise. The E word suggests that you need a coach, like a strength coach, exercise physiologist. Yeah, but I would be curious to see what they did. Are they walking uphill on a treadmill? What are they walking around a track in the park? I bet you'll see that. But it is a good point. Like, what are they having them do that wouldn't immediately make them quite the opposite of happy?
Yeah. The last question I'd have about that is versus like any task, meditation, training, workout, whatever, versus comfort modality. Anything comfort related, and how that impacts happiness on the baseline as well. Like, I would really be curious about that, because I feel like that's kind of the other side of it, whereas like people don't gravitate towards exercise and meditation and all that stuff. Any practice like that, like people who are truly actively training in the practice versus people who are more seeking comfort, what that does to their baseline happiness levels in general. Like, mostly because I think people who face uncomfortable situations, it just turns the volume down on everything else in their life, on various stresses and stuff like that. And you'll hear it in, martial arts, you'll hear it in CrossFit, any kind of training. It's like, oh, this, leads me towards, happiness. It got me off the couch, whatever. Just that versus comfort.
Yeah, and that's getting us beyond, like we said, Mike and you could probably talk better about it as far as what happens at a hormonal level and stuff with exercise. But I would guess that most people don't get a positive view of exercise from one session. Like, you give me 3 months with somebody, and then they start to notice their progress, and they get happiness out of it. That's when people get hooked. Like, they go one time and you're just sore. You go for 3 months and they see that, oh, I didn't used to be able to do this, and now I can do this. It's after time they start equating physical activity with happiness, because they see the internal progress.
Right. I'm sure there's some, again, I'm not reading this actual paper from Nature. It's just a report on it, but I'm sure there's some acute versus chronic, thing going on here. But it is true that chronically, is it just that the physiology or the immediate psychology just builds up over time. I like what you guys are saying about what about achievement? What about that delayed gratification? I'm leaner, or I'm bigger, or I'm stronger, or
Faster,
whatever.
and all
Or
those
after
things. Yep,
you're more
yep.
functional. That's the reward. It's delayed gratification.
Yep. And that's when it starts feeding in, I think. That's what I would hypothesize, is that over time, like when I get a young athlete and he's been there 3 months and he's noticed my time's dropped this far, I hit the ball this much further, I do that, like that's leading to that, and then they're hooked because this activity led to that advancement.
Right.
So it makes me happy over time. And then you couple that with whatever hormonal things are going on. Now you've got something good. I think it's multifaceted.
Exactly.
There's more than one thing going on there.
Yeah, it's biopsychosocial. Or what about the social things you get from your teammates or your coach? Or there's a ton of stuff that feeds in. It's so complicated. Yeah. But it is interesting that they're saying, if you actually look at the science with modern levels of rigor, you would think there'd just be hundreds or thousands of papers that these things just quote unquote work. And I think they're just kind of saying the science needs tweaked a bit. We need to add to the science if we're going to keep espousing these things and be more transparent maybe with the public about these things are arguably just good. All the things, gratitude, meditation, exercise, getting out in nature. But yeah, we want to have the science to really show that unequivocally. Just because the science isn't up to speed doesn't mean these things are false, right? But when people preach them like they do, I think it is good to know that, the science on this is still developing. Hard to believe with hundreds of studies, but with modern, and we can be pickier. I think to me, we can be pickier with science. I've been saying this for the past couple of years with systematic reviews and meta-analyses and umbrella reviews and all this. There's enough papers out there. We can do studies on the literature, right? We can examine all of this huge body of literature. Whereas when I was a kid, it felt like we were just doing those original studies, if that makes any sense, the individual studies. And now we can study that bulk of material and see what comes out as actually something you can apply to practice. Because I always used to tell kids in the classroom, you can't just find one new study, I don't care if it's at Harvard or Tufts or where it came out of, and then immediately apply that to practice, right? So it's better to look at this large volume of data if you can. Anyway. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting, something to talk about.
Yeah. So, all right, we'll go to break and then come back with a little topic we can flesh out.
Hey, everybody. Iron Radio is back and in an expanded way. What can you expect? Well, first, you can get it simulcast every week on the nutritionradio.org network as well as on the original podcast. It'll appear regularly on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting sites. We have a new Iron Radio / Nutrition Radio Facebook page as well. Please check us out. We're even backed up on YouTube. Second, please tell your friends who are longtime loyal listeners that they may see emails that share just the episode link and the show notes. This is a new thing, and we hope it will build community. Third, if you were a supporting member in the past, we may prompt you to resume through PayPal. But we will confirm each and every donor before reinstating that membership category. We'll never just restart your $4 auto payments without agreement from you. And of course, we will accept new members moving forward as well. Starting back slowly and honorably is the goal. And lastly, expect the sister show Nutrition Radio to expand into once weekly 45 to 60-minute episodes with guest co-hosts covering the same nerdy nutrition news that's been broadcast for a few months now in daily 10-minute clips. We hope that an expanded presence will get you the news, education, banter, and guests that's made Iron Radio's community so loyal from the start. You are appreciated.
Okay, and we're back. So what we're going to talk about today is, I guess, hypothetical, but we'll kind of flesh out what we think. We've talked about before on the show, and that's like adolescents getting started with training or people in general. And one thing that I've been facing lately is lots of phone calls from people at the high school and junior high level and things like that. Like we talked about before on the show, we used to have that presidential fitness exam. The problem with that was you got like no study for it. So how do we fix the system, I guess it is. So like what Windler has going on over there it seems like a great thing. So basically they have the high school and the junior high, and at the junior high level, basically you've got 2 years of just learning to exercise. And then, so they set parameters. Like this kid, by the time he leaves 8th grade, he needs to be able to do this. And then that way, by the time Windler gets them in high school, he can push them. So what would happen if we had some kind of system in place in our education system where we had milestones, like we do with every other subject, like math? And math, like to pass 3rd grade, you need to be able to do this. Like, but we have no system in this world, in Western world at least. I don't know about other countries because I don't live there. But like, by the time a kid leaves 3rd grade, he needs to be able to do 5 push-ups and some sit-ups. You know, give them parameters that they can actually study for. And maybe, possibly, if I was the head of the free world, teaching kids that there is actual enjoyment in physical activity again. Like start them off early. Like, okay, you're in kindergarten now. We're going to go play this game. And it's like you can mask physical things as fun. We do it with kids all the time. That's like we've talked about. I forget what football coach it was, but I was talking to a football coach, and he's like, I used to have the kids do sprints after practice. That's how we'd end practice. But then I realized if I just have them play ultimate frisbee, he said they sprint twice as fast, and they laugh while doing it. You know, he found a fun way to get these kids to work harder. And it's like we talked about before the break. It's like if you can make something enjoyable with time, it takes time to get hooked on something. Once those kids realize that physical activity is enjoyable, it's something they'll gravitate towards anyways, even though like they can handle the suck factor of training because they know this is an enjoyable activity. If you just take somebody blindly and say, okay, we haven't done shit all year, time to run a mile and climb a rope. Let's see how you do. And they fucking fail. Of course, they think physical activity sucks. Like, so.
You know, Phil, what you and Jim are talking about on the academic side, I can't tell you how many conversations, I know Mike's heard these, where professors will lament poor preparation coming into college, right? You're like, I mean, how can you love some of this sometimes chewy science that you have to wade through if you don't have any background in it? You don't have any basis in it. I used to teach exercise physiology like 101 for years. And, you know, a lot of these guys that come in, some of them have science prep and they're like, oh yeah, glycogen synthase, baby, you know, and they're hormones and metabolism and all this. And then some guys are like, oh, I don't know, man, I just like sports, you know, and they don't have any academic background in science because their high school preparation was poor. And then how can I expect them to, you know, dig into the nuances of this stuff and nerd out with me when they don't have any pleasure in nerding out, right? Because they were never introduced to it in that way. So not to take away from this, it's a little bit of a tangent, but you see what I'm saying is like, it's the same thing on the academic and the mental side and the cognitive side. The poor preparation coming in leaves the teacher or the coach at the collegiate level or with Jim high school level just floundering because he's trying to make up 8 years of nothing. Yeah. You know?
Oh, yeah, and that happens a ton. Like, that's happened with me. Like, my goal usually and the problem is you got 2 things going on at once. My goal usually for high school kids is to prepare them as high school athletes that I know are going to want to go to college. Like, my job is not to make them the best they are now. Like, we're going to push you to the point that you're the freaking best baseball player at 16 years old. What that usually leads to is burnout and injury. My goal is to make them prepared for the next level. Like, we're going to learn the exercise. Like, I know any strength and conditioning program in college, they're going to be doing cleans and crap like that. So I'm a step ahead. I can get this kid a step ahead if he knows how to do them proficiently by the time he walks into college. And just get a baseline set to where he's comfortable walking into college. Whereas, you know, you got the other outlet, you see all these little league teams, like their number one goal is not this kid's advancement, it's winning today. They want to win the little league trophy, be damned if little Johnny's ruined by college. You know? So, like, we need these logical steps, and I don't know how to do it. I mean, we'd have to rework the whole world, but you know, it's that preparation. And little logical steps of advancement. So,
yeah, it's almost like we need to get a physical education, like a PE expert on, and like, where are the standards and how are they enforced? Do they vary? Because it feels like they vary a lot, or they don't even exist.
I don't think they exist is the thing. It's like,
So,
literally they're pulling shit out of their asses. It's like there is no handbook like the kids need to be able to do this. It's just like, no, we're just gonna make you run bleachers and play dodgeball because that's what I want to do.
there are standards, but there aren't any teeth. Like, I actually have a girl who is basically finishing up her physical education degree who started training with me a long time ago, actually. And we talk about it here and there, where it's like physical education isn't really physical education anymore. And some of it's just education in general because the teachers, or at least the teaching process, has kind of lost some teeth. Like, it is a really tough bureaucratic gig to get into. But so a lot of what they teach, like, it's going to be games, right? So they're but it's just a game. And then usually they're quizzed on like the rules of the game and understanding of, the rules or whatever. But their actual physical competency is not really tested with any actual grounding or like, you can't really fail PE if you basically show up. You know what I'm saying? Like, that part doesn't exist anymore, at least in the public system.
Yeah.
I don't know. Private system, I haven't really had too much experience with a lot of private school type stuff, so I'm not sure about that, but it's gotten tough. I will say that.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, oh man, maybe half a decade ago now, I got into this kind of ongoing debate. The exercise science faculty at a university, we'll just say, was debating, should we have physical standards for our pupils, for the students? Not like, it made me think about it, Drill, when you said, like, this isn't just memorizing the rules of a given sport and then giving it back on a handwritten test. This isn't the academic. Physical standards, flexibility, strength, body comp, something. At least map them. But then, you get this sort of super sensitive, I know the word woke gets really abused, but super sensitive, like, we can't expect that. That's not inclusive. What if they have physical defects or this or that? Okay. I mean, it's all part of that conversation, right? But it is an interesting concept that if you're going to go out into the field and be a strength coach, should you have something physically going on in that regard that you're because your body is almost demonstrating. Like, once I had somebody say to a friend of mine and me, now you guys look like dietitians, because we weren't obese, I guess. But of course, a lot of dietitians are obese, or, sort of emaciated looking or whatever. It's a touchy subject. Is, can we standardize this, or even to Gerald's point, with teeth? Can we enforce it? Like, if you're going to be in this field, how could you even demonstrate an Olympic lift? You weigh 400 pounds at 5'6", and you've never tried this before. And you can't even get your fingertips to your knees, let alone touch the ground. Like, what? You can't even squat down and be comfortable in a seated, squatted position. How can you do your job? So it's just very touchy stuff. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I guess the problem is just how do we implement it? And the bad thing is, today's society, like, we're getting to the point, in my mind anyways, whatever, take it for what it's worth, where it's like we almost need it more than ever. We're in a society now that's more obese than ever before. We have less people being physically active than ever before. So is it mean for us to, like, impart standards on our community? Like, dude, you need to be this high to ride this ride. You're 10 now. It's time to be able to do something besides play Xbox. Just for the health of our own society. Like, learning that exercise is okay. But that's the problem. Like, when you force it on people, they hate it. So the problem is, you need to prove first at an early age that it's something enjoyable. Like, that physical activity is fun. Like, when I was a kid, we just played hard and physical. That doesn't happen anymore. So they've lost this entry-level barrier into physical activity is fun. Like, I learned from an early age, going out playing tag and frickin' football by ourselves that we enjoy this, or riding our bike I'd take an hour ride to the swimming pool. That doesn't happen. Everybody's a slug, and they have by the age of 10, the average kid doesn't have a relationship with physical activity, which then spirals downhill over decades, and then we've got 30-year-olds that are, Jabba the Hutt. So, I mean,
I would propose at least we're not like the actual academic standards that you would apply to math. I don't think would like to be able to say you got an A or pass fail or anything like that would be really tough to implement without a ton of resistance.
Yes, but
I would say even going towards and I don't know a ton about it. I just know kind of some basic principles of it, like the Finnish school system where they invest a lot more of their time and energy and really money and resources into the teachers themselves. Mm-hmm. And the teachers themselves are the ones who are able to make the decision, truly make decisions within the process of teaching for the kids, versus we have this huge rubric that's applied to everyone. And then now it like I said, it doesn't really have, teeth anymore. Even failing kids is giving a kid an F is tough now. Just that itself is already a problem. So in physical education would even get worse, particularly with the, I don't know if you would call it a movement or whatever, just the concept of health at every size kind of thing.
Yeah.
It would be incredibly tough to implement, but the teachers should be, and at least in physical education, empowered more to make those decisions in real time with those kids and be able to grade kids based off of their actual experience. Now, socially, we would have to essentially overhaul the mistrust with teachers that's kind of grown in the last 10, 20 years. But having a teacher who's running almost like a CrossFit class where you have or at least a good CrossFit class, not a bad one, but where you have a strength movement, maybe a couple other exercises and then a fun little finisher kind of thing, like a play finisher, right? 15 minutes to do something like that. And then you actually get kids in that system early, because there's a thing to it too with kids who paying attention, being able to stay with the task in the PE class rather than just being unleashed into the, the actual, just into the gymnasium with a bunch of balls and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you would actually create that system all the way through high school. So they would be better at all the things by the time they get to high school. And you can, maybe soften up the standards. My standards for what kids, should be able to do might be higher because the kids that come here and I train them for a while, my perception is higher than what the average is. But as far as fixing it, I don't actually anticipate any of this happening because physical anything is just, I don't know, I would just call it a commodity to most people. It's not something that's integrated into this needs to be a part of my life.
Yeah.
It's more if I have the time, if I have whatever energy, whatever.
The schools, look at the schools. What happens I think this is one of those issues with No Child Left Behind and some of that other stuff. When you set the reading, writing, arithmetic kind of thing, here's some standards, and then the art and the physical activity classes just went in the shitter.
Yep.
So then we lament, kind of what you're saying, Phil, these physically incompetent adults, right? Yeah. Because the high school coach, or like I was saying, with the college professor on the academic side, they're working with, there's no base.
Yes.
It wouldn't be a bad idea. Here's the nutritionist in me, but from what you were saying, Drill, what if we took the components of physical fitness and treated them like food groups? So most people I would think would know there's fruits and veg, there's meats and dairy and grains. You could do that on some level with fitness and just say, here's the basis, get a little bit of each of these things instead of living on candy. Right? Yes. It's the same thing with this. A little bit of muscular strength, a little bit of cardiovascular, some flexibility, whatever it might be. Something to work with. Try a little from each of these exercise groups instead of food groups.
That's the thing that's that's the key thing. Is like what we're talking about here. It can be misconstrued. Like I'm not saying that every high school age kid needs to be able to deadlift 405 by the time they graduate. Like our baseline could be extraordinarily low. Like you need to be able to do this. Like walk a fucking mile. Like it could be easy. And even if we set the parameters really small, we could better the society with minimal activity. Because
Phil,
because we go from none to a little. Yeah.
I mean, you got norms. Get out of the get above the 25th percentile would be your goal. You know what I mean? So you're literally just saying minimal competence here. You're not saying you have to be in the 99th percentile.
Yeah, it would take, and minimal competency in physical activity could drastically help our society because there's none. And that's part of the frustration. Like we try to blame high school coaches and for bad coaching or junior high or whatever. The problem is, like, I feel bad for them too because I see it every day with kids of this generation coming into the gym, like worse than 20 years ago. Like the kids, you get tons of kids that just can't move themselves. So, and that's what they're getting. Whereas 20 years ago, by high school, they'd get a hold of a kid that was in decent shape. Now they're getting kids that have never seen physical activity and trying to turn them into sport athletes in a year.
Phil, in fact, I've heard this called a national security problem, right? Because when you think about like people leaving high school and entering the military, for example, getting recruited, it's a problem when so few of us could do minimal things, right? It'd be the same thing. I imagine the drill sergeant or whoever would be like, I'm working with this guy. He's kind of a pile of mashed potatoes here physically. Yeah. I don't know. I got a lot of work ahead of me here.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
And it becomes even a national security problem, I would think, because we can't even defend ourselves. It's kind of like what you were saying when you're strong, you're hard to kill.
Yeah, and that's the problem. I mean, and that's not just at the military level. There's a reason that could be part of the reason why trades are getting high paid. Nobody wants to do physical activity. We have a large lack of physical activity in this country. Now, do we have? It's like we talked about with sport and the food we have currently. It's making the society the most obese ever, but at the same time, it's creating some athletic outliers that we've never seen before. So we have the ability to be better than ever, but the problem is that the same things that give us the ability to have the freakiest athletes ever also give us the ability to have the worst people ever physically. Mm-hmm. So it's finding that common middle ground there. It's like, let's just get some basic physical competency at an early age. And the lack of PE and arts in school did not help. No. When all that went to shit, it's like, oh, great. Well, that's how many studies are you seeing now that, especially with it delineates boys and girls, like that little boys need to go out and wear themselves out, and they'll learn better if they are allowed to do that. Like those 20-minute recesses we had, we ran our asses off, and you wear them out, and they're going to listen better in class.
There's some kind of data out there, I'm sure you could point to, that said the math scores went down when we pulled the arts and the phys ed out. The stuff that we were trying to focus on actually, it got worse. Yeah. Because we're not treating these people like whole human beings, which includes some kind of physicality and creativity and these other things.
Well, and that could be as simple. Part of that could be as simple as that was their break and fun activity. Like, basically you can only feed somebody. Let's say I hate math and I'm forced to do it 8 hours. Like if you give me a break in there and let me do something fun for an hour, okay, now I can get back at that. I'll go back to the suck pile. But give me breaks every now and then. And that could be as simple as part of that. Like that PE and those recesses were just a break from the grind. And I was able to reset. The kids are able to reset themselves and, okay, I know if I put in another hour and a half, I get another break to go out and have fun. And it's easier to keep going than just 8 hours of suck.
Right. Yeah, like mandatory lunches and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like where you disengage.
Yeah, you're able to step away from that and just go be physical and have fun and laugh and play and run and get exhausted and then come back and settle in again and put your nose to the grind. But
let's ask Mike here. Is this too controversial for you?
No. I mean, the U.S. solution always seems to be to try to standardize your way out, and then it just dies in committee because no one can agree on a standard. So I think, like Phil was saying, if you want a standard, just make it low as a starting place. That's fine. But I kind of agree with Jarrell that a lot of other countries, at least the little bit that I've seen, tend to do a much better job because they, shocker, actually pay a professionally trained person to go into the high school and starting at grade 1, like have some system of progress. You know, not that we all need to go back to the, you know, the system the Russians use for athletes, but it's pretty well established. And even for highly functional people later in life, it tends to work pretty good. And, you know, shocker, it's pretty basic. You know, at this point, you're going to do more, you know, aerobic development because of where you're at. At this point, you're going to do more, you know, gymnastics and learning your body and integration of visual vestibular systems, all that kind of stuff, you know, guided by a professional who's paid an actual decent living wage who went to school for these things, not the poor history teacher who's just thrown a PE class and be like, hey, you got this to do now too, in addition to everything else. Have fun. It's an afterthought in the U.S. Then we try to put standards around it and assume that that's going to solve everything, where historically, like you guys pointed out, it tends to make some other unintended consequence, whoops, we forgot about.
Right, right. You know, I've heard for years, and I don't have any data to point to with this, but I've heard for years that a lot of phys ed teacher positions, people will take that position and there's too much supply and not enough demand, like such a glut of people in line for these positions. The phys ed teacher will take the job and sit on it for 40 years, right? Yeah. And that can be a problem. If it is one of those people who they don't have an earnest interest in some of this and they're just going to toss out the kickball, you know, and be like, have at it for an hour. I just want to get paid and keep my job.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that's hard because then the turnover is hard. Because it's hard. You literally have to let the old guard die off before you even get new thinking in there.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, I'll end at this, but you know, how many kids do we have graduate high school that are required to take algebra that will never use it in their life? A ton. So why can't we have some kind of just like, yeah, so most of these kids aren't going to grow up and be athletes. But giving them a basic competency in physical activity is not a bad thing. You know, we give them basic competency, and that's what grammar school is all about. You know, high school, if you cut it down to brass tacks, high school is just giving you basic knowledge in all subjects. Like, we're ignoring one. You know, we have no problem like forcing little Johnny to learn algebra when he's going to be a meat packer. You know, whatever. But we don't want him to be able to do a sit-up and a push-up? You know, there has to be some kind of physical side to this education. It's
we got to bring back the physical education teachers that look like the old American gladiators with the mullet.
Yeah, dude.
You got to bring them back.
My junior high teacher whooped our ass in dodgeball. He was jacked. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just don't see. There's a fight against it, though. You know, too. There's a certain part of the population like, I don't want my kid running around. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, dude, it's okay to be not a slug. You know? Just because it's 2023 and our life is easy doesn't mean the best place to be is not there. You don't need it, but it's good to have a little extra in the tank in case you ever do.
Yeah, there's got to be a way to incentivize it, you know, to make it worthwhile. Because even for those parents, you'd be like, well, you know what? If you only care about math scores because you're grooming your kid to be a physician when he's 14, his math scores are going to go down if he doesn't do these things. So how about there's that, if that's what you value. But there's got to be something that you can hold out as a carrot. Because I agree with what you said earlier on. It's not just a stick. It's got to be a carrot. There can't be shaming. There's a whole field of adapted physical education. So if somebody has a legitimate physical reason they can't do one of these standards, of course that's accommodated. Of course that's accommodated, right? Just like you wouldn't make somebody who's developmentally delayed, you know, force them into calculus when they're not ready. You can't. You have to have some type of adapted approach, right? So you're not shaming the certain people. But yeah, when it's a national security problem, or like you said, what Jim's talking about, or what you're talking about, we're a mess over here in the U.S. We're kind of a mess physically as adults, and it's a good point about education. High school is supposed to make you broadly, I don't know, what we deem as minimally functional and educated, in a variety of subjects. Yeah.
And that's the whole point of it. And that's okay. Like, we want that. That's a good thing to have. Okay, you leave high school and we at least know you're okay at kind of everything. That's the point. And now you can choose where you want to study. Or, by the time they leave grade school, they need to potentially be ready for middle school. And, at middle school is where organized sports start and things like that. So that's part of it. I mean, and you can't tell me that if, like, we implemented some kind of system today that 20 years from now, when these kids are leaving high school, like, I would have to guess that our health parameters would get better.
Yeah.
If we just had people in decent shape, which is in the long run going to pay off.
Yeah.
So,
well, we're talking about defense, but think about just medical spending and stuff. Like,
yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Way down. Down.
Yeah, if, like, oh, look, type 2 diabetes is cut in half.
Right.
Shit like that. Like, way down. So, just from some kind of minimal competency in being physical. And, well, hell, we could point that towards eating right, too. Some kind of minimal education and nutrition.
Yeah.
So, but, anyway.
No, good topic.
Yeah, we can call it. So,
all right. Well, thanks, everybody. I guess we'll see you next week.
Everybody have a good day.
Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community.
The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.